Hello students, and welcome to the Approach Techniques Master Tutorial. This is one of the most interesting topics in arranging and jazz arranging specifically, in my opinion. What it helps us to do is to avoid having a bunch of consecutive repeated notes, particularly somewhere in the middle of a chord voicing. Playing these notes when they're repeated, especially at a fast and a swing style, is very cumbersome to the instrumentalist. So that's why we try to avoid having these repeated notes. And in particular, we're going to be doing this on tones that are generally considered to be non-chord tones, which is where these approach techniques really shine. So for this assignment, before you take it on and before you even watch this video, or you should have read the Gary Lindsay pages 99 through 107. And we're actually not going to cover what he talks about in the way of upper-lower neighbor tones, sort of an exception rule that's on page 107. So, but we are going to do all of the other approach techniques, and this assignment is adapted from Lindsay's 108, 109. It's really meant to be sort of a more concise form, but still cover each of these approach techniques. So let's see here. We've got to mix our four-way close and drop two positions. And generally speaking, the higher we get on one of these phrases, and I'm looking, for example, at this first little phrase right here, we've got this little here. We can pretty much assume that we're going to be at, at drop two, certainly by that F sharp at the very least. But we'll be starting in four-way close here as we're closer to the bottom, and we don't want to violate lower interval limits or do anything like that. When we're doing these approaches, we need to think backwards. I mean, it's really all about targeting a chord, which means thinking backwards. So what we're going to do here is, you can see we're going to be using two types of techniques for this first part. And we are going to first target this chord right here, and the melody note, the downbeat, that F sharp, and we are going to target it with a chromatic approach. So we're going to sort of cordon us off right here. I'm going to voice this melody note, this F sharp, in the most boring way I can think of, which is just 7 on top, next the 5, then the 3, then the root. So no substitutions at all. Okay, and I've got our little available tension chart here just for reference, but no substitution, so just very, very boring voicing, okay? So if I'm going to approach this from a chromatic step above, well, it'd be pretty natural to assume that I'd be approaching from an A flat major 7 chord, right? So all of these chord tones in this voicing are going to come down by half step, as you've read about in Gary Lindsay's textbook. They all move down by half step in the same direction as the lead. All right, so now we've got this sort of planing like that. Let's move to the end of this part where we're going to employ parallel technique. Okay, and you should be able to handle this one on your own. We're going to work on this parallel. Again, I'm sort of going to target my chords, so I'm going to figure this out first. I'm going to voice this in drop 2 because we're up pretty high. So I've got my 3rd on top. I'm going to bring my root is going to be down here. And then my 7th is going to be up here. And my 5th is going to be right here. All right, and we've got a B flat. All right, so this is a parallel approach. It's a little different than chromatic. The big difference is we're going to be moving with the lead here in that same direction, down in this case by whole step, okay, not by half step. So what that means is it means that since we're targeting a D, we're going to be targeting it in the second voice, or second from the top, with that E, and then a C, and then down here a whole step above the E flat, which is going to be obviously that F. Okay, so I think you can handle the rest of that part on your own. Let's take a look at part 2 here. So this gets us into using the dominant approach. So what we have to do is we have to imagine a dominant chord as it relates to the so-called chord of the moment. So this is the chord of the moment for basically for these 3 events, okay? Now here, with this A flat on top, we are going to be thinking in terms of this chord's dominant. So we're thinking back here about a D dominant chord, okay, and it could be dominant 9, it could be dominant whatever, although we do know that it's got a flat 13 that's been imposed on us, right, in the melody. However, here we're not thinking of a D dominant chord, and we're now thinking of a G dominant chord, because that's going to be the chord that's targeting, or the dominant of, this note, the melody note, which we are targeting. And then moving on here a little bit further, again, we are now dealing with, or in the chord of C, if you will. So this is going to be a G dominant. This is going to be a G dominant flat 9 here, by the way. And then again, another G dominant flat 9. And then here, when we're wrapping up here, again, we are now targeting this E flat chord's melody note, the F. So now we've moved on to another dominant chord, the dominant of E flat. So that's going to be a B flat type of dominant chord, and see here that there's an F sharp. So it's going to have that sharp 5 as an alteration, or a substitution for the regular 5. Just look at that available attention chart if you need to. All right, so we've got this spidery little line that sounds like this. Very chromatic, but we're not using chromatic techniques here. We're using the dominant approach techniques. Let's start by targeting. I'm going to target this chord right here. And then I'm also going to be targeting this. And then finally going to be targeting this E flat minor 9. Those are the 3 that I'm going to just target for my little demo for you right now. So starting with the C7 here, again, plain chain, boring, 4-way closed voicing, 5, 3, root, 7, the B flats and the key signature. Very, very boring. Now, to approach that, we're going to be thinking, okay, we're going to be thinking of this as a G dominant chord. So we've got our flat 9 in the top, and again, that's a substitute, as you know, for the root on a dominant type of chord. So we've got our A flat, the flat 9, and then we're going to have our 7, the next one down, since we're just in 4-way close, we're not dropping anything. And then I'm going to just use the simplest way, which is a natural 5 here. Okay, I'm not using a substitution. This gives me pretty good voice leading also. You can see it just comes down by whole step to that C. And then a B natural. Okay, I need to indicate the natural because of the key signature. So what you can see is pretty smooth voice leading. I've got a half step motion down, half step coming down, whole step from the D to the C, and then a half step from the B natural to the B flat that we have right here. All right, so that's that one. And just to illustrate that, once again, you know, we're going to end up using the same notes here. F, D natural. And normally, I would have figured this chord out first, okay? But I can just tell by looking at this that it's just going to be repeating itself. We've got 5th, 3rd, root, and flat 7 again for the dominant. All right, so let's go to the last one. You know, and what I just said about this is the more of this sort of thing that you do, the less you have to think in reverse. And since I've done this a fair amount, I tend to just work from the left to the right. But when you're first doing this, it's a lot easier to go from right to left. So let's try right to left again. So E flat minor 9, well, we've got our 9, which is a substitute for the root in the melody here. And so let's just go down from there. We've got our available attention chart if we need it. So 9, and then our 5th, and then our 3rd. All right, so we've got that now, and we want to approach that by dominant. Now remember, we're thinking about a B flat dominant with a raised fifth here. So we're going to be saying here's our 5, and then here's our 3. Got to watch out for accidentals with this stuff too, right? Because they carry through the measure. So that's one thing to just be cautious of. So 5, 3, and then our root of the moment for this chord is going to be better to use a C flat here. Because if you look at this, if I were to do another C here, I'd have this repeated C. If I were to do a B flat here for the root, then I'd have a B flat that repeats to another B flat. So I'm actually going to use one of the substitutes again from the available tension chart. Okay, B flat dominant 7, I'm finding my root. I'm going to use this flat 9, like so, so that I get a nice in, you know, the what would be the tenor voice, basically, the third voice down, a nice half step voice leading there. And now I've just got to add my 7th in there, so that A flat. And now I've got some pretty good voice leading. So looking from like right here, for example, I now have. Okay, so that works pretty well. Let's move on. I'm going to start with the diminished approaches next, because I think that they're a little easier to grasp than the diatonic. So let's start here instead with these diminished, which we'll just be doing in four-way closed. So remember from the Lindsay textbook that in order for this to work, the diminished has to be targeting the 2nd, 4th, flat 6th, or major 7th chord scale of the so-called moment again, okay? So this is of the moment right here. And this is the flat 6. F is the flat 6 of, you know, an A dominant chord. Or if you're thinking of A as a root, F is like that flat 6. So this diminished approach will work here. And all we have to do is build a diminished chord going down. And, you know, before I even do that, let's set up our target chord. So I'm going to go ahead and just spell the rest of this out. Just four-way close. So the substitute for the 5th, which is the 13th, a 3rd, which is a C sharp. I'm going to just use the plain old A natural, my root, and then a G like this. And you're going to have, in some cases, you know, your notation program might decide to insert an accidental because you're going to have an A flat in the previous measure. So diminished. All right, what do we do here? We just build a diminished chord down from this lead note. So F, starting on top, we have F, and then a D, and then a B natural. Again, there's a B flat in the key signature, so I'm adding that natural sign, and then an A flat. All right, so now we've got, and I'm just going to play this part of the phrase right here. A is my root. All right, so that works. And then you got to think of this. I'll let you do this one. This is going to be scale degree natural 4 of the moment, right? It's the natural 4 of the B flat. So this technique will work for that, and you're just going to build a diminished chord down in thirds. Okay, so C, A, F sharp. Okay, and then you're going to resolve them to this somehow. I'll let you grapple with that one. Again, we're going to probably be in a drop 2, certainly at the beginning of this measure. It's up way high. So let's do one of these in drop 2 position. We have a melody note, this 6th basically, okay? That's a substitute for the 7th, right? For a major type of chord. So what we've got now is 6th on top, and I'm going to use a drop 2 voicing here for this chord that we're targeting. So we've got our, again, 6 instead of a 7, and then we're going to put our 5th. Remember, F is the root, so our 5th is a C, down here an octave, and then our third goes right here, and then I'm just going to use the real root in this case, which is just an F. All right, and then we're going to approach this with the diminished chord. Again, I'm thinking about stacking, or rather coming down. Okay, but then I've also got to consider that I'm dropping this pitch like so. All right, so what we've got now is we've got our E natural on top. That's a natural 7. I'm dropping my C sharp down to this octave, which means that I need to change this to a C natural now. And I've got a B flat here. And then here, the G would normally be the next one down. I'm going to just put it in this clef down here, that part of the staff. So this is good. I now have voice leading going down a whole step in the lead, a half step here, a whole step, and a half step. But they're all headed in the same direction, which is nice. All right, so we've got this nice drop 2 with the diminished approach. Okay, let's look at the diatonic approach. This one is sometimes the hardest to learn, especially because we've got a scale here that's not as common. So if you look at page 104 in your Lindsay, you're presented with the half-whole diminished scale. Now he sometimes calls these auxiliary diminished scales. I prefer to call it the half-whole scale because that's the construction. So we're in bass clef here. Let me just sketch this out for you. So in the key, like for a half-whole scale, we've got C, and then C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C. Okay, half whole, half whole, half whole, etc. All right. So what we're going to do here now, again, is we're going to sort of establish our targets. So I'm going to start by targeting this right here. So we've got our 5th on top. There's a 3rd. I'm going to use the flat 9. It's a signature part of the sound. Okay, and you can see that it's been indicated here. And then a B flat, my 7th. Squeeze that in there. Now I need to approach it diatonically. So what that means is the melody's been done for us. Now I have to refer to the scale down here, okay, which is in bass clef, and I need to find the scale degree that's 1 lower than this E natural. So the D sharp from the scale, that pitch right there, is 1 step lower using that scale. And then 1 step lower than a D flat or C sharp, okay, is just the C. And then 1 step lower on the scale than this B flat that we're targeting in the bottom is an A. So now what we've got, and you know what? I'll voice the first one for us just so we've got it here. So we've got our basically our 5th on top, or a form of the 5th is 13th. I'll put the 3rd right underneath that. A form of the root, a D flat, and then a B flat here, type of 7th. So at this point what we've got is as follows. We have there's a root. Okay, it's kind of a crunchy sound. Let me do the last 2 of this measure, and then you're on your own. I'm going to do these in drop 2. So we're going to be targeting this chord, or this melody note. So we've got our 3rd, our root I'm going to put down an octave, and I'll use the substitute root, which is the D flat. And then we've got our 7th is next in line here, B flat. and then our fifth. I'm going to put the fifth down here. It's going to be a G. All right, so now we need to approach these diatonically. Everything is going to move up with the lead here. So we have our scale down here. One lower than B flat in the scale is A natural. One lower than the G, E F sharp. And one lower than the D flat or C sharp is C. So for this little segment, we now have this. All right, that should be enough to get you started. Good luck with this. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with.